Hello, welcome to Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. I'm your host, James Mackey. We have a great episode for you today. We have Josh Millet with us, and he's the founder CEO of Criteria Corp, which basically helps companies bring a science-driven approach to hiring, and they do some work on the post-hiring side as well. Today, we're going to be discussing skill-based hiring, removing bias, DEI, and labor supply problems, the concept of filtering in people as opposed to filtering out. So we got a lot of great topics today. Josh, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, James.
For sure. And would you go ahead and provide that quick overview on yourself that we were talking about so people understand what's formed your perspective throughout your career?
Absolutely. So my name is Josh Millet. I'm the CEO of Criteria. I co-founded Criteria about 15 years ago. Criteria is a SaaS platform that customers use to hopefully make better hiring decisions. So we have a suite of tools. Most of them are pre-employment assessments. So that's primarily the use case that our customers come to us with is we're having trouble hiring, we're making more bad hires than we'd like, and how can you help us? So our products are used by customers in a wide variety of industries. We have about 4,500 customers globally, most of them in North America, but a good amount in Australia and the UK and Canada as well.
That's really cool. So you said 4,500 customers globally?
That's right. Yeah. So there's a lot of SMBs. We kind of started out being very small business focused. And then as we grew, we started at first really by accident and then more purposefully moving up market to work with bigger customers. And now our enterprise customers are actually our biggest revenue stream at this point.
I think if you're able to push up market accidentally, as you put it, right, or just like organically, however you want to phrase it, I feel like that's a really good sign that you're onto something.
That's right. Yeah, I think so. And I'd like to say it was, intentional at first, but we happened to get a couple big customers and, they sort of have different ideas and requirements that they want out of the product. And so they kind of pushed us to rethink the product in certain ways. And then, over time, we began to get more traction in that space. And obviously, we love working with big customers as well as small, because our goal is to have an impact on the way that people do hiring. And enterprises obviously hire at scale. So it's an exciting place to be if you want to kind of make your mark on how hiring happens.
Oh, I love it. And I think this is a perfect segue into the topics because, what we're going to be talking about, your perspective is formed on helping 4,500 companies hire. And that is a fantastic sample size. And also having that at that global scale. I don't have quite that scale, but I had helped over 150 companies hire through our embedded recruiting resources. So I think the dialogue between us is going to be hopefully very valuable to the talent acquisition executives tuning in to hopefully give them some insight into talent strategy for 2023 and beyond. The first topic we have outlined today is skill-based hiring. I want to hand it over to you at first, and hopefully you can provide a high-level definition on what that means to you. And I'm hoping we can both riff from our own experiences on the topic from there.
Yeah, happy to. So skills-based hiring is really all the rage, I guess, in HR these days. I remember, I hadn't gone to conferences for a while because of COVID, and we were at SHRM and HR Tech this year, and skills-based hiring is a huge theme. I think for me, it kind of means a couple of things, and there's a couple of reasons it's very timely now. So for me, I think of it as companies focused on the actual skills and abilities that a person has rather than the means by which they acquired them, right? So in practical terms, what it means is that companies are focusing less on things like requiring a 4-year degree for a lot of their jobs, for example. And maybe even sometimes relaxing experience requirements a little bit. So I think there's a widespread recognition these days that degrees and requiring a college degree for a lot of roles is not really a very good predictor of success in a role. And just practically speaking too, right? I think it's only like something like 38% of US adults have like a 4-year degree. So you're really limiting yourself if you have that at the top of the funnel, like in the job description. So there's a big, and I think really positive trend away from requiring degrees for all jobs and substituting, what can you do? Like what abilities, what skills do you have? So we're big fans of skills-based hiring. I can talk, if you like, about how we think it's a good first step, but it doesn't quite go far enough. But I think it's a really positive trend that companies are moving away from, demanding things in their job requirements that just aren't always necessary for the role, and kind of overly restrict who moves forward in the process. And that's, in this labor market that we're in today, that's a really important thing and a really positive thing, I think.
I love all of this, and I actually there's some follow-up topics and elements that I want to dive into. The 4-year degree thing, I mean, I know that was just one of several examples, but I could not agree more. There are so many instances where you have bright, talented, skilled folks that, for whatever reason, were not able to complete a 4-year degree, or maybe decided that they didn't want to if they potentially got a job in their industry where they were making money, and it really didn't make sense to split the time when they could just go all in on their career. For instance, I didn't graduate. I was 2 years into a finance degree, and it slowed me down a little bit at first, but I think just having the focus of, let's just figure out how to add value and achieve outcomes opposed to collecting accolades, it really has ultimately served me well. And I think that companies need to understand that there are several reasons, numerous reasons, from things related to even potentially socioeconomic differences to, again, preferences and whatnot, and everything in between, that can potentially prevent somebody or persuade them to not move forward with a college degree. So I want to slow down on that. And I think that really any company that is serious about hiring the best people out there should really question whether or not they need degrees. And of course, there's exceptions. People are going to say, well, what about lawyers or doctors? I'm not saying that. I'm talking about most jobs in corporate America. So like, I always feel like I get heat for that when I say that. People are like, well, what about this? I'm like, I'm not talking about that, guys.
That's right. I think, like, for me, it's not a commentary at all on the value of college. Like, college is great, for the people that it works for. But to your point, there's a lot of reasons to reconsider that as sort of like a gating mechanism for employment, right? Like, there's the issue you raised of like equal access to college or 4-year degrees, which is a big issue in America, right? There's also like the costs of college have like spiraled way out of control, and student loans debt is a real problem. So some people are making really rational choices not to go to college and go directly to a job. It's not only about access; it's about actually smart choices in the current environment, and the calculus of like paying for a 4-year degree has changed a lot in recent years, I think.
It's nuts. It's nuts. It's like, when I was going to school, I paused after 2 years. It was a weird situation in which I was charged with out-of-state tuition by surprise. I won't go into all the details, but that thing happened, and I was like, I may not have gotten my degree in finance, but why the hell am I going to pay out-of-state tuition for this degree? I had already started a career in sales. I didn't have a corporate job yet, but I was like, I think I could probably figure out how to get my foot in the door. And I ultimately did. And from there, it's like, you're making money. Like, why go back? And I think a lot of people, one of my good friends, he's a tech executive on the product side. And, similar situation. He never, finished his degree, and he's one of the best product design folks in the country. For enterprise cybersecurity products. So you see so many examples of this, and I think it's becoming more common at this point in time, but it's still like, I mean, we were looking back even 5-10 years ago, and there was such a resistance to change. And I think it was because folks were like, well, I did it. And it's like, they had to make others do it to feel like it was a good use of their own time, which is silly. Like, it can still value, like, as you said, it's still valuable. It's great if, somebody has the opportunity to go to school and it makes sense, and they could balance other values and priorities. Like, amazing. Like, I would love for my daughter to go to college if she wants to. Right. But, I think it's just interesting. And I think it was a good kind of first example to bring up that you did.
Yeah. And I think, like, for me, I agree. It's not just like entry level, mid sort of level jobs either. Like, at Criteria, actually, we hire, we're a technology company. We hire a lot of software engineers. And we find that the success rate when we source, for example, from boot camps is just as high, if not higher, when we're hiring sort of entry-level engineers or junior engineers, as when we look at people who have like a 4-year CS degree, right? You get a more diverse group, right? When you go to boot camps, you get better gender balance. You get people who are like maybe midway through their career, they decide they didn't want to do whatever they're doing, so they switch to software engineering. And you also get people who like are closer to knowing the languages that technology companies actually use today to code versus some of the CS programs that maybe are not as ready to hit the ground running day one.
Yeah, and by the way, Josh, I think that you might really enjoy the previous episode on talent acquisition trends and strategy. I had on Corey Kazak, and he's the founder CEO of Aspireship, which is a platform company that does upskilling for folks that are transitioning into tech. He focuses primarily on sales and customer success, and this is basically his whole theory about we can equip them with the knowledge that they need to be successful in the tech industry and to make to fulfill that requirement in a what might be considered an untraditional way, right, that can be actually even more beneficial for companies than hiring experienced tech talent that's going to come at a higher price tag and may have a shorter tenure, essentially the equivalent of like lifetime value, than right, folks that are transitioning in, particularly for those more so entry level tech roles. It doesn't mean that the person is necessarily entry level in terms of being junior, but in terms of transitioning into tech, they might stay with the company longer. So I thought it was really interesting, and they're making waves within the tech industry, and Corey's pretty well known at this point in time. So I think for those tuning in that are interested on that topic, and Josh, yeah, I think you might enjoy listening to that one.
Yeah, sounds great. I'll check it out. There's also, it's interesting listening to you. I think the other issue with skills-based hiring is that it's kind of a necessity now that companies kind of transition to this approach, because in the labor market that we're in, which we believe at Criteria pretty strongly that the talent, the sort of labor supply and demand imbalance we've seen the last few years is like a multi-decade trend that we're going to see in the next 10 to 20 years, where we're going to have a pretty severe like talent scarcity problem in the US and potentially in some other countries that we're active in. And so skills-based hiring is really also about like taking the approach of like filtering in, like looking at everyone, getting this really great data, whether you do it through assessments or whatever technique you use, to gather this objective data to look at everyone who applies, rather than starting from the premise of filtering out, the 60% of applicants who don't have the educational pedigree you're looking for or whatever. So it's not just that employers are realizing the benefits of this approach. They're kind of being forced to take this approach because there's a labor supply issue.
One of the things that you had mentioned in our prep document for the show is Harvard economist estimates 27 million hidden workers in the US. Can you explain to us the concept of hidden workers?
Yeah, I think you're referencing this professor called named Joseph Fuller, who I've read. He does some really cool work. The other day, the unemployment rate went down to 3.4%, right? It's never been that low, I think, in my lifetime. I'm 51 years old now, so it's been a while since we had an unemployment rate that low. And so that speaks to this issue of labor shortage, right? But his point when he talks about hidden workers is that there's so many people who aren't being included in that number, right? So if people are partially employed, meaning they work part-time, but maybe they want to work full-time, or they're underemployed, right? Like they have a really good degree or whatever, but they're working, an super entry level job or whatever. Or people who they aren't technically unemployed because they're no longer looking for work, but they are kind of willing to work if the circumstances are right, for the right role. That's something that we saw a huge spike in COVID, right? So it's this concept of like a declining labor participation rate. And so he estimates that there's 27 million people who kind of fit into that category. And he calls them hidden, not because they're like being hidden by choice, but he really thinks they're kind of hiding in plain sight, in the sense that the way we do talent acquisition in this country is so focused on some of these things that you have to have that are in a lot of job descriptions, that they're sort of systematically filtered out because they don't have the right degree or because they don't have the right amount of years of experience. And so it's a real opportunity for companies to kind of rethink their talent acquisition workflows to, as I like to say, like filter in some of these people versus filtering them out based on, the workflows in their ATS.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And by the way, let me just jump in real fast. Earlier, I had said that Corey's episode was the episode right before. His episode just went live, but by the time this one's published, it might be a couple back. So the title is State of the Employment Market for Startups and Growth Stage Tech, Hiring Junior Talent and Career Transitioners. So if anybody wants to learn more about that, that's where you go.
I love that focus on career transitioners, by the way. One of the things that we believe really strongly, and we have a lot of evidence of this at our own company with people we've hired, is people who make a mid-career transition are like behind the eight ball in the sense that, again, there's this pretty consistent demand of X years of experience in a field, right? And so, for example, our director of engineering in North America came from a completely different field, right? He came from finance, right? And then decided he wanted to be an engineer sort of partway through his career. And like the traditional way that companies hire is not friendly to that scenario, right? Whereas if you can assess someone on their like transferable skills or abilities, that is a really a good way to kind of spot talent in one field that wants to be in another.
Understood. And we also have here ATS filter out. And that's one aspect of bias that's actually built into algorithms. What can you share with us about that? And what can companies do to ensure that their ATS isn't filtering folks out?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of ways, some of which we've already touched on, that ATSs filter out. So, obviously the degree requirements in job descriptions, we encourage companies to just, unless they really know of a reason to include them, like just drop those from your job descriptions, right? The best companies out there, Google and Tesla, are dropping degree requirements. So, why can't you, right? But the other thing that's really at play is a lot of these ATSs use some form of keyword analysis from your resumes, right? And that's just a pretty weak signal overall, right? Like, resumes are unreliable for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that people know or have a vague idea of how these ATSs are configured sometimes. And so keyword stuffing is pretty easy to do. And so, we're of the opinion that if you can, employers should be trying to get objective data as early in the process as they can on these applicants, so that people whose resume contains nothing or nothing relevant, right? You can really look at, okay, what kind of abilities do they have? What kind of skills do they have? What do they have personality traits that might make for a good fit for a role? And get that data to filter in, rather than using, pretty weak signals like the amount of experience you have, or whether you have the right keywords in your resume. A lot of the AI and ML that companies are beginning to use top of funnel are really focused on keywords, and some of it's interesting technology, but there's not always a strong link between that and like the outcomes, once those people are hired.
For sure. Let's continue to kind of go down the rabbit hole of bias, right? I would love to get your thoughts on technology's role in removing human bias. There are so many areas of the process, from top of funnel all the way down, even in talent attraction, before the conversation starts, where bias could be unconscious bias, typically can be introduced into the process. So where would you want to start when it comes to removing bias from like a human level? What can companies be doing, and how can they leverage technology to remove bias throughout the process?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. When we hire new people at Criteria, I think it's the second day where we put them all through a little session on unconscious bias, how it works, what it is. I often lead that myself. I really am passionate about it, about the topic. And I think one of the things that's changed in the last 5 years is HR people as a group are becoming more aware of kind of like what it is and how it impacts the hiring process. So, and there's a bunch of pretty frankly terrifying research on that. You think of HR people as a group, obviously it's a diverse group, right? But in general, I think HR people tend to be, very concerned with DEI, very progressive in the sense they want to be inclusive in terms of building diverse workforces, and their hearts are definitely in the right place. But some of the research, for example, shows that just by changing there was this landmark study on resumes that happened about a decade ago, I think, where that's been replicated since, where some of your listeners might be familiar with it, where they sent out a bunch of fake resumes to job postings and measured the callback rates. And they found that just when they changed either the gender or the sort of ethnicity on the name on the resume, the callback rates differed like 50%. It went either up or down 50%. And so, for example, like stereotypically African-American sounding names got callback rates that were, 33 to 50% different from sort of stereotypically white sounding names. And this was like really shocking research, right? Because everyone thought initially, oh, there's a flaw with the study or something. Then other researchers tried similar studies, and they basically replicated the results, right? So it's almost like hard to believe that just changing the name on a resume, right, could have that much impact. And I think, where unconscious bias comes in there is people have this preconceived notion of what a successful salesperson, for example, looks like, right? And then they see a name, and if it doesn't correspond to that mental image, bad things start happening in terms of how they view that resume. Another study that's really instructive there is, I think, in the way that interviews are done. So a little bit lower in the funnel, right? Where there's a lot of evidence there, just so much subjectivity and bias creep in at the interview process stage. So one study, for example, showed that I think about 30% of interviewers, people who are interviewing candidates, have sort of made up their mind about whether that person is a fit or not in the first 5 minutes of an interview. And, if you think about what happens in the first 5 minutes of an interview, it's typically, small talk, nothing too serious, right? And so things like how the person's dressed, their mannerisms, things like that really have nothing to do probably with how they're going to do in the role, tend to really inform an impression. And then the problem with that is once you're anchored around that impression, it's tough to move off it the rest of the interview, right? There's this psychological phenomenon of anchoring, right? Once you've formed an opinion on something, it's hard to kind of be moved off it. And so, unstructured interviews are really problematic for bias. And so we have all these tools that are designed to help companies do structured interviews, which a lot of evidence show are 2 or 3 times as predictive as unstructured ones.
By structured interviews, are you referring to consistent questions that are asked to each candidate? Is there anything beyond consistent questions that you would throw in the bucket of structured interviews?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that's the most important element, right? Is that we have a set of structured questions that are consistent for each person, ideally asked in the same order, right? Ideally, those questions are kind of linked to job-related things, like are relevant to the job. And that's one of the reasons that people maybe don't love doing structured interviews. They can feel kind of like awkward and inorganic and stiff, right? But it doesn't mean you can't ask other questions. It just means you have to include that common core of questions. But beyond just the same questions for everybody, there's also, I think a key element of structured interviewing is also like having some kind of scoring rubric so if, let's say you have 3 people interviewing a candidate, maybe you're looking for these 4 things, these 4 abilities or competencies, and then grading against those 4 in a predetermined way, right? So that you get very objective sort of views of the candidate. And then finally, like not talking about the candidate until you've sort of submitted those scores, right? Because there's all sorts of research that shows that kind of groupthink can really set in quickly if like one person, for example, who's the loudest voice in the room really liked or disliked the candidate, that tends to maybe influence other people's evaluations if they haven't already, turned in those evaluations. So the common questions is the main part, but there's a whole series of things that you can do to kind of mitigate bias and get more objective there.
Yeah, and I think so. It's like even the custom questions, though, it's not always enough. Like most companies don't do that, right? Like most hiring managers are not asking every candidate the same question.
Absolutely.
Or even if they think, yeah, we are, they're not asking it in the same way. And that matters too, because it could produce a different response based on the candidate. And sometimes it can be very nuanced. Like you could be looking at somebody's background or experience, and specific question pops up that might be valid. But
That's right.
because like you didn't see something on somebody else's resume, you don't think to ask it in the same way, or you're asking the question based on their specific experience at a role versus just giving them the opportunity to present something that you may not uncover from a quick glance to a LinkedIn profile.
Right.
But yeah, that's a huge problem. Not asking everybody the same questions and then when you're reviewing your notes, like when they're, these hiring managers are reviewing their notes and trying to recall back to why they like somebody or why they didn't like somebody, it's a total nightmare for everyone.
Yeah.
So and then you're right, like the assessment grading tools in terms of like goals or, having specific criteria that you're looking for in terms of a rubric. What types of beyond those? So we have like tools that help people do like custom, consistent interview questions, the grading rubrics. What other type of technology out there helps people remove bias? Is there anything else that you could think of, or maybe that you guys do, or you're aware of other companies doing that helps remove bias?
Yeah. So one of the most, you mentioned kind of top of funnel, right? One of the most significant ones top of funnel that I think is very common now. Some people are using technology to do it. Others are just doing it kind of manually. That people have realized is an issue is just rethinking their job descriptions themselves, right? So we talked a minute ago about, how if you have a degree requirement and you don't really need it, right? It's not exactly biased, but it is going to have a huge amount of adverse impact, right? If a college degree isn't really necessary to do the role, and really what you need are a set of skills, ABC, then if you look at graduation rates by different ethnicities and different skin colors in America, you see dramatic differences because of educational access and some of those things that we talked about earlier. Similarly, like gendered language in job descriptions has been shown to have a big impact on what your applicant pool looks like from a gender mix perspective, right? So there's a lot of I think AI-driven tools now that are helping companies write more sort of neutral job descriptions that are more inclusive. And I think there's also again in this labor market, I think HR people need to get used to the fact that even if you have sort of 8 things you ideally want, from a candidate, 8, key boxes to check, like we've got to get comfortable with the idea that sometimes really good candidates will only check 4 or 5 of those boxes, right? So we can't expect to fill like all 8 boxes with every time we make a hire. And so that's kind of a leap for HR people, right? So how do you sort of get comfortable with that risk? Well, make sure you've got really good data on the applicants so that you can make strong predictions about, hey, even though they only have, let's say 5 or 6 out of the 8 job requirements, they're likely to be a really good fit.
Right. And I think too, just generally speaking, hiring managers and leaders need to do a better job of prioritizing the outcomes that a role needs to produce. And I think 1 to 3 is, and like when you see 5 to 10, it's like, well, are you actually really clear on what success looks like in this role? And why are we setting up the org chart and the hiring strategy in this way? And are we really being thoughtful? And typically what I've seen is the answer is absolutely not. Like, I don't care if we're talking about engineering or revenue. Everybody should be accountable for like 1 to 3 things. Maybe
that's right.
Maybe like an executive VP level, maybe there's like 1 more, maybe 1 or 2, I guess. But really, even at an executive level, like there should just be a few key North Star metrics, or maybe it's you hit this North Star metric, build your team, and align with the CEO on X, Y, and Z. I mean, it should still, when you're prioritizing properly, I don't think people should have this huge list of things that they need to do.
8 is probably the wrong number. You're exactly right. I think it's still all too common that people do have this long list of things they want, and really being like really rigorous about getting to a smaller number of key things or key drivers of performance is part of it. And even then, kind of recognizing that you may not get everything you want. I feel like there's a lot of paralysis and around like finding the perfect candidate for a lot of roles. And the way our tools work is we never promise our customers like that they'll never make a bad hire again, right? But it's really about at scale, like when you're hiring a sales team, you're hiring an engineering team, like using data-driven tools, using data-driven methodologies, you'll increase your batting average, right? It's almost like a Moneyball approach to hiring.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. Well, I'm excited too to get your thoughts, just generally speaking, on what you're seeing out there in the market. We won't spend too much time on this, probably another 5 minutes, and I think we're probably going to be wrapping up at that point in time. But what are you seeing out there with your? And I honestly, if we could focus on enterprise, I would love to do that, because typically when I ask about the state of the market on this show, we're diving into startup and growth stage, typically in the tech industry. So it'd be really wonderful to break outside of that. What are you seeing in relation to hiring, talent acquisition, trends in enterprise right now?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And we actually had a board meeting last week when we were talking about this topic. In terms of hiring and talent acquisition, I think there's a totally bifurcated market now, I think, where you've got technology and then you've got everything else, right? And I'm sure it's probably this way for you, James, and it certainly is for me, in terms of like my professional network is overwhelmingly, in the tech industry, because that's the industry I'm in. And so the stuff I see on LinkedIn is mostly from tech people, et cetera. And, you can listen to that kind of bubble and think the world is ending with, because we've had a few layoffs, and not to diminish the impact of those layoffs, it's serious stuff. But we're finding that within technology, and in terms of our customer base, our customer base is about 9 to 10% tech companies, which is about the percentage that they are, in the US, right? So not really overweighted, maybe a little overweighted there. And, hiring has really slowed down there. Companies are getting very, I think, very cautious about spending, that kind of thing, with the environment we're in and higher interest rates. And in the rest of what I would call the real economy, the other 90% is just people are still desperate for labor, right? They're desperate for talent. And so you really have, it's really hard to sort of separate those two things when you're in the technology industry. And, there's a lot of angst around, what's employment going to do? I mean, it's pretty remarkable if you step back and think, like, we may have a recession, maybe it'll be a mild one, we don't know, but like the unemployment rate is at historic lows, like 50-year lows. And to me, that makes the chances of a big recession very, very unlikely. And I think we need to, like, in the tech industry, we need to step outside of the tech bubble and realize that if you're talking about like an airplane company or hospitality company or restaurants, those folks are still really, really in need of more talent than they have. And it's really, they're really, to put it candidly, desperate, to hire people. And that's a very different dynamic than when you look in the tech industry. So that's what I've noticed, is it's a really bifurcated market there. We have totally different conditions in technology versus outside technology. And maybe in technology, I'd like include also maybe like, consumer mortgage, things that are really impacted by high interest rates, right? But for the most part, outside of technology, it's full speed ahead, even as technology slows down.
So outside of tech, and I know you mentioned a couple of examples, but high level list of industries that are doing the most in terms of hiring at the moment.
Yeah. So really interesting. Of course, everyone would probably know about, like, leisure and hospitality is a really active area. Anything where services are a strong component is really active in hiring. One sort of stealth one that's been really good for us as a company, that is one that might be a little surprising, is manufacturing, right? So for about 40 or 50 years in the US, right, manufacturing hiring and headcount was slowly declining, right? We all kind of know that long-term trend since the 1970s, basically, as these other countries sort of took over the supply chain, right, from the US. And one of the things I think has happened in COVID, not just in the US, but in some other places as well, is people are saying, hey, with this supply chain thing, we can't necessarily, rely on these other countries being there for us all the time. And so a lot of customers, a lot of companies are sort of nearshoring more of their manufacturing to the US, right? So bring it back to the US. And so if you look at the unemployment stats and the jobs numbers in the last few quarters, it's the first time consistently, the first time in many decades that the number of manufacturing jobs is steadily increasing in the US. So that's a really interesting trend. Hard to say if it'll be like really long term or not. But I think some of those companies that are rethinking where they're doing their manufacturing have made kind of long-term bets on having a few more of their people, in the US, for example.
I love it. And what are and this is the last question. I'm really enjoyed this conversation with you. You really know your stuff inside and out. So I'm sort of taking advantage of that here to just ask a few questions that we didn't have planned. What are the overarching talent trends that you project over the next 5 to 10 years? I think we've already discussed a skill gap or a labor gap in certain situations. You could delve further into that, or are there other big trends that you think are going to take place over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I think skills-based hiring is one of the big ones, right? We're big fans of that. We also feel like, I referenced this earlier, we feel like skills-based hiring is like a good start, but it's kind of leaving the job half done, because I think, like you've talked about the skills gap a couple of times, like I think that if we just insist on hiring people who already have all the skills we need, we're never going to close the skills gap, because part of the issue is there's not enough people with the skills that we think all our jobs demand. And so for me, one of the interesting things there, and what I would predict might be like the next wave or the next evolution of skills-based hiring, is to move to sort of a revised notion of maybe something like competency-based hiring or ability-based hiring. The idea being that, let's say you need skills A, B, and C. Well, there may not be enough people for me to hire those skills. And so what I need to do is kind of open the aperture, or widen the sort of the talent aperture or talent profile that I'm looking for, to hire people who are going to be very likely to be able to quickly learn those skills, right? Like one of my favorite examples there is, I still see all the time, like when people are hiring salespeople, they put in the job description that you must have experience using Salesforce CRM, right? And for me, that's like a distraction, right? Like Salesforce, if you're a user as a salesperson of Salesforce, it's just not rocket science, right? Like you can learn that pretty quickly. And being great at using Salesforce to record your conversations or whatever it is has almost no relation to being great at sales, right? So that's like a skill, I guess, but any smart person can learn how to use Salesforce. I don't mean as a Salesforce admin, but I mean as like a salesperson. It's hilarious to me when I see stuff like that still.
Well, that's really funny, because if you think about it, it's, if you're hiring a revenue operations person, yeah,
Absolutely.
get the Salesforce expert, because they can make it even easier.
Right.
For people using this, I mean, where it's just like maybe not seamless. I don't know if Salesforce ever seamless, but a pretty good workflow that's quite simple.
Yeah.
But yeah, to require that for us, I mean, and you see, so I mean, like you're bringing up one of several examples. Like we've brought up some good examples here, but there's 100 others, and so we just have to be aware of those types of requirements that really just aren't that important. Would you have any advice for talent acquisition leaders that are trying to convince hiring managers to drop some of these requirements that really aren't indicative of a successful hire?
Yeah, I mean, I think indexing, what I would like, our approach that I encourage people to take, because I think it's science driven, is don't index as heavily on things we know are weak signals just because they are in a lot of job descriptions. So the two that I always focus on are, we beat this to death, but like the degree requirements, don't have them if you don't need them. And then also the years of experience minimum requirement, right? Like that's been shown that the amount of experience you have is a pretty weak signal as well in terms of predicting success. And you point out there's some obvious exceptions to that, right? If you're hiring a Salesforce admin, they need to be an expert in it. I would never want like an inexperienced brain surgeon to operate. So there's some highly specialized roles where, of course, like deep domain expertise is necessary. But by and large, like those are not the positions we hire for at scale in the US. So like salespeople, customer support, customer success, like these kinds of roles, you need to look for smart, good problem solvers, critical thinking, hard workers. Like it's really not rocket science. And the experience requirements and the educational pedigree are often like distractions that I think we need to kind of gradually, or maybe even not gradually, like get past.
I agree with you. And I hope for those out there that need to convince their hiring managers, best of luck. I always say though that it's okay to try to educate, whether it be the other members of the executive team or your hiring managers. You try to get that understanding if they're open to that type of education or shift in the interview process. But if
Yeah.
you're at a company where folks just are not open to making that shift, then it probably makes sense to leave and find a company that is aligned. Because if you find yourself in a position where you're on a monthly or quarterly basis trying to argue or position or explain why you need to do things a certain way to hit hiring goals and it's not happening, at the end of the day, you're essentially becoming accountable for things that you can't control. And you never want to be in that position, particularly when you reach an executive level. So I just think it's one of those things, like, fight the good fight, try to educate, but not too long. It's better to find people that, find folks that you're aligned with, opposed to trying to change, minds, which particularly in tech, sometimes you're dealing with some pretty big egos. So I think it's just a balancing act between education, telling a story with data, providing success stories whenever possible, tying back why this matters from a North Star metric perspective. What goals does the CEO have for the company over the next 12 months? And how does your role and what you need to accomplish and the shifts you need to see in terms of the talent strategy tie back to that North Star metric? And maybe even getting into hiring plans and using that as a lever. Like, okay, you want me to scale the sales team. I don't feel like we have clear success metrics, and I don't feel like based on this, we're able to hit our Q1 hiring plan. What I think we need to do is change X, Y, and Z requirements. And if we do that, then we're going to be able to hit the hiring plan and thus our North Star metric. That's a better executive level conversation than what I think a lot of talent leaders do, which is like, well, we're cutting down on the talent pool if we do this. And
Right.
it's, the CEO might say, okay, well, you're going to have to figure that out with the VP of sales. Or the VP of sales might say, well, let's give it a shot for 3 months anyways. But if you could tie it back into OKRs and North Star metrics, then you're going to have a much better likelihood of convincing your executive team to make the shift you need to make. And again, if that doesn't work, find people that get it, move on.
Yeah, totally agree. I think a lot of it comes down to like risk aversion. People don't want to be embarrassed. And so they think, oh, if I hire someone with 5 years experience, I won't be embarrassed, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, we got to get past that. And it's really about like what gives us the greatest percentage of like building a winning talent strategy long term. And that's to like, follow the data, basically.
Yeah, there's so many ways to make incorrect assumptions. And this is, from a leadership perspective, something that I've learned. And, for some strategic positions, having time in the role does matter, like for
Absolutely.
some executive roles. And, speaking of that, it's things like years of experience. I mean, some of my top performers and, in terms of years of experience, it's not a very good correlation to success. Also like hours worked, quite honestly. Some of the people that are producing the best results are not necessarily the ones working the longest hours, and understanding that working hard and getting outcomes are not necessarily always correlated. I mean, sometimes people just have better aptitude or whatever else. I'm just, so I think it's questioning a lot of those assumptions and a lot of those belief systems. And if you can get your executive team to question those assumptions too, in a way that ties back to the outcomes they need to achieve, that's what we need to do. But anyways, hey Josh, this has been really fantastic. You're very bright and you know a lot about this topic. So I really am thankful that you chose to contribute to the talent acquisition community today. I know this is going to be a very popular episode and hopefully help guide talent strategy for a lot of the leaders tuning in. So thank you, Josh.
Thanks so much, James. Really fun conversation.
Oh yeah, this was a blast. You're going to have to come back sometime soon.
Sounds good.
Cool. And a couple of quick things. We are releasing a new episode every Tuesday morning at 5 a.m. So make sure to tune in next week as well. If you would like to be on the show or know somebody that you think would be a good fit for the show, please let me know. You can go to talenttrends.io or you can connect with me on LinkedIn, shoot me a note on what you're thinking. We're currently accepting guests that are VPs of talent acquisition, chief people officers, and CEOs of organizations that are highly relevant to the topics that we discussed. Last thing is, if you are receiving value from this show and you're tuning in regularly, we really do appreciate if you could leave a review on wherever you're tuning in. And thank you so much for your support. Well, anyways, we will talk to you next time. Thanks for joining us today. Take care.